The heat was a physical thing, thick, suffocating, and absolute. It had been 100 degrees Fahrenheit for 7 straight days in the manicured HOA-mandated tranquility of Cypress Grove, a neighborhood built on the promise of order and low crime rates. For Leo Sterling, 14 and currently lying face down on the cracked concrete patio, this meant the promise of anything fun was perpetually deferred. "We're going to melt," his sister, Maya, 16 and perpetually draped in black, muttered, fanning herself uselessly with a magazine dedicated to the art of curb appeal. "We're not melting," Leo corrected, his voice muffled. "We're brazing." Their parents, George and Clara, were inside, engaged in the silent, tense war of air-conditioning economics. George, stressed to the point of a perpetual twitch beneath his eye, had just received a massive, unexpected bonus shipment at the logistics depot where he worked. A single, giant industrial-grade pallet box designed to hold nearly a metric ton of powdered beverage mix, Tang. It had arrived broken, deemed unusable for commercial transport, and somehow, through a bureaucratic twist George hadn't bothered to explain, it was now sitting like a bizarre, monolithic sculpture in their yard. The box was enormous. 8 feet long, 6 feet wide, and nearly 4 feet deep. Its interior was pristine, lined with a food-grade industrial plastic liner that smelled faintly of citrus and despair. Maya sat up, her eyes wide, finally looking past the heat and the futility.
"Leo," she whispered, "that's not a box."
Leo lifted his head, following her gaze. The sun beat down, turning the box's bright orange cardboard shell into a neon beacon of possibility. "It's the world's largest juice carton," he said. "No," Maya insisted, scrambling to her feet, suddenly energized. "It's a pool. A giant, glorious, disposable, HOA-destroying swimming pool. The idea was absurd, insane, and instantly necessary. The neighborhood's official pool, a pristine, over-chlorinated parallelogram, was 20 minutes away and required 3 forms of ID, a clean bill of health, and the signature of a notary public to use. George Sterling came outside, carrying a sweating glass of iced tea, still dressed in his work khakis, even at 5 p.m. He looked at the box, then at the desperate, sweat-sheened faces of his children and sighed. "Absolutely not," he stated, before they could even pitch the plan. "Dad, it's 48 square feet of heaven," Leo pleaded. "It's already lined. It's food-grade plastic. We just need water and duct tape." "It's cardboard, Leo. It'll dissolve into orange pulp and flood Mrs. Sterling's garden next door." "You know she measures her petunias with a micrometer." He meant Brenda Sterling, their neighbor, the self-appointed Queen of Cypress Grove, and more officially, the long-serving president of the HOA. Her yard was a silent, immaculate war zone of perfection, separated from theirs by a low, purely ornamental brick wall. "We'll reinforce it. We'll use the extra tarp from the garage. We'll be responsible. Look, Dad, look at us." Maya dramatically pulled her sweat-drenched t-shirt away from her skin. "We're literally dehydrated." "This is a medical necessity." George hesitated, rubbing his temples. He was tired of arguing, tired of the heat, and tired of Brenda's constant critical gaze. The kids looked so genuinely miserable. Besides, the box was too big to break down and too heavy to move until the weekend. "Fine," George said, defeated. "One condition. If one single drop of water, one drop, breaches the container, it's drained, dismantled, and you spend the rest of the summer polishing Brenda's gnomes. Understood?" "Understood," they chorused, a wave of relief and triumph washing over them. The construction was a manic 5-hour act of youthful engineering. Leo was the architect, barking orders and securing the perimeter. They lined the box's interior with 3 layers of heavy-duty black construction sheeting, secured the top edge with industrial-strength Gorilla Tape, and used leftover 2x4s from an old project to buttress the exterior walls. Maya, the detail artist, was meticulous, overlapping the tarp seams like fish scales, ensuring no point of entry for the water to touch the cardboard. The water was the next Herculean task. They ran 3 hoses simultaneously, one from the outdoor spigot, one from the laundry room sink via a long, precarious chain of connectors, and one from the bathtub. requiring Clara to periodically scream about the drop in household water pressure. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the neighborhood, the pool was finally miraculously 3/4 full. It wasn't clear, sparkling blue water. Due to the lingering orange dust from the Tang packaging and the black tarp beneath, the water had taken on a bizarre, hypersaturated golden apricot glow, reflecting the sunset like a giant liquid jewel. It looked less like a swimming pool and more like a mysterious, radioactive liquid vat from a 1980s movie. "We did it," Maya breathed, tears stinging her eyes from the heat, the effort, and the pure, irrational joy of it all. Leo didn't speak. He just took a running leap and plunged into the frigid, orange-tinted water. The sound of his splash echoed in the suddenly silent backyard. It felt incredible, a violation of every rule of summer, a triumph of necessity over convention. Maya followed, whooping with laughter. They thrashed and splashed, the strange color of the water making their skin look slightly jaundiced, but wonderfully cool. They were so loud, so genuinely happy, that they didn't notice the shift in the ambient sound of the neighborhood, the slow halt of lawn mowers, the silencing of distant chatter. Then they saw her. Brenda Sterling. She wasn't in her yard. She was on her back deck, positioned perfectly, sipping a pale liquid from a wine glass, dressed in a white linen shirt that defied humidity. She wasn't actively looking at them. She was looking past them, focusing intensely on the horizon, yet her body language radiated contempt. She looked exactly like a cat pretending not to notice a mouse it was about to swat. "Keep the splashing down, Leo," Maya warned, her voice suddenly low. "She's watching." "You know she has a folder titled Sterling Violations ready to go," Leo knew. Brenda had successfully issued formal violations for their basketball hoop being 6 inches too close to the property line, for their dog exhibiting excessive enthusiasm, and for a gnome that George had painted to resemble a pirate, a non-conforming yard fixture. For a full 10 minutes, their joy was muted by her presence. The water was cool, but the air felt heavy with surveillance. Then, George came outside, saw the strange orange spectacle, and actually laughed. A real, genuine laugh that seemed to shake the stress off his shoulders. It's glorious," he admitted, shaking his head. He pulled out his phone to take a picture. "You guys are crazy. Just remember the rule. No flooding." "Not a drop." He took the picture and went back inside. His approval was the only thing that mattered. Leo and Maya exchanged a look. George was right. This ridiculous pool of orange water was their victory. They weren't going to let Brenda ruin it. "Cannonball duel," Leo challenged, climbing out onto the hot rim of the box. Maya grinned, climbing up the opposite side. "Loser has to weed Brenda's sidewalk cracks." The subsequent collision was magnificent. Both hit the apricot water at the same time, producing a splash that wasn't just large, it was cataclysmic. The orange tidal wave arced high, shimmering against the darkening sky, and then fell with surgical precision. It didn't hit the pavement. It didn't hit the lawn. It slammed directly into the low, ornamental brick wall that separated their property from Brenda's. The force was enough to temporarily displace the black liner, causing the 2x4 support on Maya's side to groan and shift. For a sickening, elongated second, the cardboard bowed, and then a gusher, a thick, golden-orange vein of water, shot out from a newly opened seam near the bottom of the box. It wasn't a drop. It was a spill, then a flowing, low-grade river of Tang-infused liquid coursing down the slight slope of their yard. Its destination, the meticulously tiered bed of African marigolds and Siberian irises that Brenda had just spent $400 on, and which she proudly displayed as the neighborhood's official welcome feature. The apricot-tinted water hit the mulch, instantly turning it dark and saturated. It leached across the topsoil, its orange residue staining the white border stones. In seconds, the bottom row of iridescent blue irises began to look visibly wilted, assaulted not just by water, but by the sugary, dye-heavy solution. Leo and Maya scrambled out, slipping on the wet tarp, watching the horror unfold in stunned silence. "The 2x4!" Leo gasped, pushing against the bowing cardboard. "The irises," Maya whispered, staring at the growing orange stain on the pristine white stones. Suddenly, a sound like a raptor descending echoed from next door. Brenda Sterling wasn't on her deck anymore. She was sprinting across her lawn, her white linen shirt billowing, her face a mask of incandescent fury. She reached the border of the orange contamination, stopped, and stared at the ruined flowers. "No! No! No! No!" she shrieked, a sound that wasn't human. It was the sound of a woman who had invested her entire identity into maintaining a perfect facade, watching it get destroyed by a beverage popular in 1960s space programs. George, hearing the shriek, burst out the back door, his phone still in hand, ready to yell at his kids for being too loud. But he stopped dead when he saw the orange river and the look on Brenda's face. "Brenda, I'm so sorry. We'll clean it up." He started, taking a step toward the fence. Brenda didn't look at him. She looked straight at the pool. At the ridiculous nay. The black SUV idling at the curb was too imposing for Cypress Grove, a neighborhood where the loudest traffic noise was usually a teenager's muffled rap music. The vehicle was a symbol of pure, impersonal bureaucracy, and the crisp, white envelope lying like a fallen guillotine blade on George Sterling's lawn confirmed its purpose. George's initial panic morphed instantly into a cold, parental resolve. He pushed Maya and Leo behind him, shielding them from the relentless glow of Brenda Sterling's satisfied glare next door. "Stay here. Do not say a word," he ordered, his voice low and gritty. The driver's door opened with a smooth, expensive hydraulic sigh. Out stepped a man who looked exactly like the corporate embodiment of beige: thin, pressed chinos, a navy polo shirt, and a clipboard held like a scepter. This was Mr. Derek Finch, Cypress Grove's primary compliance officer. Finch didn't acknowledge Brenda, didn't look at the orange stain creeping toward the decorative brick wall, and certainly didn't look at George's children. His gaze was fixed solely on George. George strode onto the lawn, snatched the envelope before Finch could take another step, and ripped it open. The paper inside felt dense, almost like currency. "You couldn't have just talked to me, Finch?" "It's 7:30 on a Sunday," George demanded, scanning the dense text. Finch adjusted the non-prescription glasses resting perfectly on his nose. "Mr. Sterling, you are aware that we have specific protocols for structural and aesthetic violations, especially those originating from the HOA president's immediate vicinity. Ms. Sterling utilized the emergency hotline. We are obligated to respond with dispatch." George's face went white as he read the penalty section. 2500 de car, George nearly shouted, the number echoing obscenely in the quiet evening air. "For a cardboard box and some juice mix? Are you serious?" Finch's voice was utterly devoid of inflection. "The violation is specifically for structural integrity threat, Code 4A, unauthorized temporary structure exceeding 500 gallons in water capacity and lacking required permits, and aesthetic pollution, ground contamination, Code 8C, discharge of colored liquid effluent onto a neighboring property causing irreparable harm to protected ornamental vegetation, specifically marigolds and irises. Furthermore, the preliminary fine is for the immediate dismantling. Failure to comply within 12 hours results in a doubled fine and the HOA contracting a cleanup crew at your expense, plus daily compounding fees. Irreparable harm?" Leo whispered from the patio, sounding genuinely sick. Brenda Sterling finally spoke, her voice ringing with the self-righteous authority of the wronged. "The marigolds are hybrid stock, George, and the irises are from a specialist nursery in Sonoma. They cannot simply be replaced." She turned to Finch. "I believe the initial claim mentioned toxic spill, Mr. Finch. I'm requesting a full soil remediation assessment, paid for by the violating party." Finch nodded robotically. "Duly noted, Ms. Sterling. That will be added to the official record, and the remediation fine will be assessed upon soil sample results." George crumpled the letter in his hand. Sunday $500 was bad. Soil remediation could easily be 5 or 10 times that. His eyes darted to the bright orange box. It had to go. "Now." "Finch, look," George said, trying to regain control. "We were just trying to cool off. It was a stupid mistake. We'll drain it, we'll dismantle the box tonight, and we'll personally clean the runoff with bleach, detergent, whatever it takes. Can we please just get a warning, a $100 fine? Mr. Sterling, the water is an alarming shade of apricot. We must operate under the assumption of biohazard until proven otherwise. The fine stands, and the containment vessel must be removed by 7 a.m. tomorrow, Finch concluded, giving a curt, practiced nod. He got back into the black SUV. The door closed silently and the vehicle drove away, leaving nothing but the envelope, the orange stain, and the escalating panic. George stood there defeated, staring at the pool that had brought 5 minutes of joy and an imminent financial disaster. Inside the house, Clara Sterling was leaning against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, staring at the back window. The whole ordeal had drawn her out of her domestic truce. She hadn't yelled about the water pressure this time. The stakes were too high. $1,500, George. We just put half that on the credit card for the leaky water heater replacement, she said, her voice dangerously calm. I know, Clara. I'm going out there right now to drain it, George replied, running his hands through his hair. I'll use the siphon hose. It'll take all night. But it's better than letting the whole thing collapse. Maya and Leo emerged from the hallway, their faces pale with remorse. Dad, we're so sorry, Maya whispered. It was our fault. We shouldn't have done the cannonball, Leo finished, looking down at his feet. George sighed, his anger deflating. Look, I know you meant well. It was a dumb idea, but you're kids. You tried to solve a problem, the heat, with ingenuity. We'll clean up the mess. But you have to help. We are draining this thing now. Clara shook her head. A siphon hose? It's 8 feet long, 4 feet deep. That will take until noon tomorrow, and Brenda will have the cleanup crew here by 9. We don't have time for slow and steady. She walked past George, her eyes focused on the industrial utility knife she kept in the junk drawer. We need a faster way, Clara stated, her eyes hard. That liner is thick. If we cut it low, near the bottom, it'll drain faster than the Titanic. George froze. No, Clara. The entire structure is cardboard. That water is the only thing keeping the pressure even. If you cut the liner, the water pressure will blow out the 2x4s, and we'll have a 50-square-foot flood that covers the entire backyard, not just Brenda's flower bed. So we reinforce it while it drains, Clara retorted, already heading for the back door. We can't afford to procrastinate. Brenda is already calling this a toxic spill. If we don't start the process visibly and dramatically, she wins this round by default. It was a standoff. George, the logistics man, wanted a controlled, careful process. Clara, the usually compliant homemaker, saw the clock ticking and was advocating for a high-risk, high-reward surgical strike. She's right, Dad, Maya said, stepping forward. We can hold the 2x4s while the water drops. Leo and I can do the manual reinforcement. Leo nodded, grabbing a hammer and nails from the workbench. We'll be the counter levers. George looked at his wife, seeing a spark of defiance he hadn't seen since they argued over which brand of washer to buy 10 years ago. He realized this wasn't just about the pool anymore. It was about protecting their family from the HOA's oppressive control personified by Brenda. Fine, George conceded, grabbing the circular saw. But we do it surgically. I'll cut 2 drain holes near the top edge, and as the pressure decreases, we'll expand them down. We're not dropping the whole 400 gallons at once. Clara handed Maya the utility knife. No time, George. We have 12 hours, and this thing still has 300 gallons. We need to cut at the bottom. We need a faster solution. A small, tense struggle played out on the patio under the eerie glow of the orange water. Clara held the knife, determined. George wrestled with the siphon hose, trying to prove his method was viable. We'll start with the siphon, Clara. Give it 20 minutes. If the level hasn't moved significantly, we go with your nuclear option. George compromised, desperate to avoid catastrophe. 20 minutes later, the water level had dropped barely an inch. Brenda was outside on her deck, sipping a fresh drink, watching them with clinical patience. She was waiting for them to fail. It's not working, Dad, Leo said, his arms aching from holding the heavy hose. Clara gave George a look, a triumphant, I told you so glare mixed with genuine urgency. Okay, nuclear it is, George muttered, his defeat complete. We need to work fast. Maya, you cut. Leo, you and I brace the weak side. The moment you cut, push the knife sideways to keep the slit small. We want a controlled leak, not a rupture. Maya nodded, her black clothes already damp with sweat and orange runoff. She crept toward the bowed side of the box, where the 2x4s had visibly shifted earlier. She located the dark, almost invisible line where the plastic liner met the bottom seam of the cardboard. George and Leo positioned themselves opposite her, pushing against the frame, bracing themselves for the pressure surge. On 3, George instructed, his heart pounding against his ribs. 1, 2. Before he could say 3, Brenda Sterling's voice sliced through the air like a laser. George, I don't know what you are planning, but I am advising you, I am ordering you to stop. That is considered tampering with a structure under compliance investigation. George ignored her. Now, Maya. Maya slid the blade deep into the black plastic, about 6 inches from the bottom corner. Instead of a controlled leak, the pressure instantly found the path of least resistance. The blade, unable to withstand the weight of the water, tore through the plastic in a sickening, vertical rip, turning the small slit into a jagged, foot-long gash. A torrent, a geyser of golden-orange water, erupted outward with the force of a ruptured dam. It hit George and Leo like a fire hose, knocking them backward off the patio and into the damp, newly contaminated grass. The 2x4s, completely overwhelmed, splintered, and flew apart like matchsticks. The cardboard box, suddenly unsupported and internally saturated, didn't just leak. It collapsed. The long side facing Brenda's yard buckled inward, and the entire structure fell onto eye. The backyard, once a zone of domestic tranquility and now a sticky, ruined battlefield, was violently illuminated by the alternating flashes of the fire truck's emergency lights. The air, heavy with humidity, now carried a dominant, cloying scent of cheap citrus and wet cardboard. George, Clara, Maya, and Leo were huddled near the back door, dripping and shivering, less from the cooling air than from the sheer, overwhelming terror of the moment. They were quarantined, watched over by a junior firefighter, while the fire chief, a muscular woman named Chief Ruiz, meticulously surveyed the orange swamp spreading across George and Brenda's properties. 2 men in full, gleaming white Tyvek hazmat suits moved with absurd slow-motion gravity across the lawn. They placed bright yellow absorbent booms around the largest pool of liquid on Brenda's side, treating the sugary water with the reverence one would reserve for concentrated sulfuric acid. This is what you called for. Brenda, George muttered, his voice hoarse, looking at the full-scale operation now tearing up his lawn. You wanted an environmental catastrophe, you got it. Brenda Sterling, finally shaken but refusing to break her posture, stood on the edge of her deck, her hands gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles were white. I reported an uncontained colored liquid discharge from an unpermitted structure, George. My duty is to protect the health and safety of Cypress Grove. If your reckless children created a chemical weapon, that is your liability, not mine. Her words were hollow, even to her own ears. The hazmat team was now deploying specialized chemical testing strips. Maya, watching the spectacle with wide, horrified eyes, leaned into George. Dad, what happens if they find out it's just, really old Tang mix? She whispered. Clara, practical even in the face of financial ruin, answered for George. If it's toxic, we lose the house. If it's just really old Tang mix, we still lose the house, because they'll fine us for the cost of the hazmat call-out, the contaminated equipment, and the massive public nuisance. The clock ticked. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire chief's radio and the gentle swoosh of the hazmat boots on the saturated grass. Then the 2 white suits conferred, one pulling a small tablet from a waterproof pouch and tapping rapidly on the screen. Chief Ruiz approached the Sterling family, her face grim. She pointed a heavy-duty flashlight at the shimmering apricot-colored mess. The preliminary readings are back, she stated, her voice tight. We have confirmed the substance is overwhelmingly composed of highly soluble sugars, water-soluble food dyes, FD&C yellow number 5 and red number 40, and concentrated citric acid. A collective, internal sigh of relief escaped George and Clara, but it was immediately stifled by the chief's next words. It is not Strictly speaking, a chemical hazard in the immediate sense of explosion or poison. However, it is now classified as a large-scale food-grade environmental contaminant. She turned, her flashlight beam sweeping toward Brenda. Mrs. Sterling, your claim of a toxic spill necessitated a Level 2 hazmat response, diverting resources from a citywide power outage. The substance, while non-toxic, is extremely corrosive to plant life due to the sugar concentration and pH, and it will permanently stain all porous concrete and masonry it touches. This is now a massive cleanup operation. Brenda stepped forward, indignation momentarily replacing her fear. Then proceed, remove it. Bill the Sterlings. We will, Chief Ruiz replied evenly. But hazmat is done. They were checking for chemical contaminants. Now we shift to hydraulic remediation. Due to the volume and viscosity of the runoff, the only way to prevent permanent staining and fungal growth is immediate, massive, high-pressure washing and flushing. George watched as the chief motioned to the back of the fire truck. 2 firefighters began unspooling fire hoses. The diameter of George's forearm. We need to deploy water at high pressure and high volume to dilute the sugar and flush the dye off the property and into the main. Storm drains before it solidifies, the chief explained. We are essentially turning your backyards into a controlled flash flood. Brenda's eyes widened, finally comprehending the devastating irony of her successful call-out. A flash flood, deployed by the city using industrial-grade equipment, was about to destroy the very property she was trying to protect, far more thoroughly than the initial spill. Wait! No, Chief, you can't use that much pressure on the turf, Brenda cried out, stepping off her deck. It will destroy the root system of my Bermuda grass. It will cause soil erosion. Chief Ruiz didn't even look at her. Ma'am, you reported a contaminant spreading across your lawn. If we don't flush it, it kills the grass via osmosis and attracts every insect in a 5-mile radius. We are prioritizing containment over aesthetics. Stand back, please. Sound. The shuddering thump of the fire truck pump engaging, followed by the high-pitched whine of water pressure building. Brenda Sterling watched, helpless, as the first torrent of raw, powerful municipal water slammed into her once pristine backyard. The pressure immediately ripped up sections of the contaminated Bermuda turf and sprayed a muddy, orange-tinged plume high into the air. The spectacle of the fire department hydro-blasting a suburban backyard to remove a Tang spill was too bizarre for the digital age to ignore. Within 40 minutes, the initial police fire scanner report of a hazmat spill in Cypress Grove had been picked up by a local news chopper. A sleek white van from Channel 9 News arrived, followed by a local blogger carrying a camera with an oversized lens. The focus shifted immediately from George's family to the person who triggered the emergency. The Channel 9 reporter, a young woman named Dana Vance, found Brenda Sterling standing on the remains of her brick wall, trying to shout instructions over the roaring hoses, her white linen shirt now splattered with mud and orange residue. Ma'am. Dana Vance with Channel 9 News, the reporter said, shoving a microphone in front of Brenda's horrified face. You called 911 claiming this was a toxic spill. Can you describe what kind of chemical weapon you believed this substance to be? Brenda, completely unprepared for the media spotlight, seized the opportunity to reassert her narrative. This is an attack on the integrity of this community, Brenda declared, her voice cracking but amplified by the microphone. These neighbors, the Sterlings, built a massive illegal structure, a vessel of unknown capacity and contents, designed to flout every compliance code. They deliberately unleashed a highly pigmented substance that has ruined thousands of dollars of landscaping. I alerted the authorities because my duty as HOA president is to protect property values and the nature of the substance. Dana pressed, eyeing the orange water still being flushed toward the street. I am told it is a complex, sugary acid mixture. The hazmat team confirmed it was highly corrosive. This is a clear case of malicious negligence and a fundamental disregard for community guidelines. George watched the broadcast unfold on his phone. A frantic neighbor had already posted the live feed. Brenda, soaked and hysterical, was successfully painting them as environmental terrorists. The camera panned over to the collapsed, sodden Tang box, and then lingered on the absurd stream of orange water now pooling at the curb. staining the asphalt a sickly yellow. Clara turned to George, her fear replaced by white-hot fury. "She's lying! She called it a toxic spill to get us fined, and now she's lying on television to avoid paying for the damage her overreaction caused." "We have to call their bluff," George said, pulling out his wallet. He looked at Maya and Leo, who were still shaking from their near-drowning experience. "You kids stay here. Clara, we need to go down to the curb." He walked out past the fire chief, dodging the powerful hoses. He walked right up to the Channel 9 camera, which immediately swung his way. "Sir, are you the homeowner responsible for this spill?" Dana Vance asked. George squared his shoulders. He looked defeated, drenched, and profoundly tired, but something in his eyes had hardened. "I am George Sterling," he said, looking directly into the lens. And that was not a chemical weapon. That was a pool. A homemade pool our kids built to beat the heat, using an industrial-grade cardboard box. He held up the crumpled HOA fine, pointing to the line for aesthetic pollution. My neighbor, Brenda Sterling, the president of the HOA, filed an emergency toxic spill report because our children's pool water, which, yes, was slightly orange, spilled onto her prize-winning hybrid marigolds. "That corrosive acid mixture she's talking about? It's powdered Tang." The words hung in the air. Powdered Tang. The reporter's professional smirk faltered. The cameraman choked back a laugh. "Tang, sir? The orange drink mix?" Dana asked, her voice incredulous. "The original?" George confirmed, a ghost of a smile finally touching his lips. And now, because the HOA president lied and demanded a hazmat response, the city is spending thousands of dollars of taxpayer money to clean up a sugary beverage spill with fire hoses. Meanwhile, the HOA's own rules are what led to this. They prohibit any above-ground pool unless it meets 37 different structural requirements and is painted a specific shade of beige. This was a box. A one-time solution to a 104F heat wave. And now, the HOA president has caused more property damage with her power trip than my kids ever could. Brenda Sterling, hearing the word Tang repeated on live television, finally collapsed her perfect posture. She let out a small strangled gasp, realizing her carefully constructed narrative of E. The sun rose on a devastated cypress grove. The Sterling backyard looked like a lunar landscape. Patches of dead, orange-stained grass, concrete bleached white in some areas and permanently yellowed in others, and the pulverized remains of the cardboard box and the brick wall heaped in a massive, ugly pile by the fire department. Brenda Sterling's yard was equally ruined, stripped of its turf, exposing bare, nutrient-poor soil from the high-pressure wash. The media coverage had solidified the situation. The Sterlings were victims of HOA overreach, and Brenda was the deranged tyrant who called a hazmat team on a juice spill. However, the costs were still pending, and the threat of financial ruin hung over George like the stagnant humidity. George had spent the entire morning of his off day in the local municipal office, meticulously confirming the information from the anonymous caller. He found the original plot plans for Cypress Grove, detailed surveys that clearly marked the boundary between Lot 14, the Sterlings, and Lot 15, Brenda. The retired contractor was right. Brenda's ornamental brick wall, the very structure that the initial orange wave had destroyed, was an unapproved, non-compliant encroachment. The foundation, which had been exposed by the collapse, clearly crossed the official line by 4.2 inches, a fraction small enough to ignore under normal circumstances, but a catastrophic violation under the draconian rules of the HOA. "She's violated the same codes she uses against us," Clara whispered, standing with George in the kitchen, examining the survey map overlaid with a grainy, close-up photo of the wall's broken footer. "Worse," George corrected, adjusting his glasses. "She was the head of the architectural review committee when that wall was built. She rubber-stamped her own illegal construction. That's a massive conflict of interest and potentially fraud, depending on how the bylaws are written. So, what's the play?" Maya asked, nursing a cup of coffee. The high-stress week had aged the teenagers by years. "She's called an emergency HOA board meeting for tonight. The agenda, which I received an hour ago, is simple. Ratification of fines and determination of further legal action against Sterling, Lot 14, George said, placing the notice on the counter. She's going for the kill, Clara stated flatly. She thinks I'm defeated, George replied, gathering his printed evidence. He looked from the wall survey to the HOA bylaws, then to the copy of the hazmat cleanup invoice, which the city had reluctantly sent. Tonight we don't negotiate the fine. We initiate a counter takeover. We use her biggest violation to make our pool look like a fender bender. The emergency board meeting was held in the small, harshly lit clubhouse meeting room. The air was tense and sticky, the central air struggling against the lingering heat. The board consisted of 4 members besides Brenda. Ted, the treasurer, nervous, easily swayed. Cynthia, the secretary, Brenda's loyal lieutenant. Frank, the grounds chair, a silent gardener. And Robert, a new younger member who just wanted to play golf. They sat around a long, polished oak table. Brenda Sterling, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, despite the chaos of the night before, led the meeting. She looked tired, but energized by righteous anger. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for convening on such short notice. As you know, the events of the last 24 hours have been unprecedented in Cypress Grove history, Brenda began, her voice crisp and formal. The Sterlings of Lot 14 engaged in a deliberate, willful act of non-compliance, resulting in a large-scale liquid discharge that required a Level 2 hazmat response and caused structural damage to the common property, namely, the decorative brick boundary wall. She passed out a packet. Attached, you will find the initial fine, $1,500 for the unpermitted structure, and the estimated cost of the hazmat cleanup and the hydraulic remediation, totaling approximately $18,450. I propose we ratify the initial fine immediately and vote to place a lien on the Sterling property for the cleanup costs, with a penalty if not paid in full within 30 days. Ted, the treasurer, swallowed hard. 18,000? Brenda, that's a lot. The news coverage was pretty bad. Are we sure we want to look like we're bankrupting a family over orange drink? Cynthia glared at him. It's about rule enforcement, Ted. We must protect the integrity of the community. If we let them get away with an $18,000 spill, what's next? A giant tire fire? Vote now. Before the vote, George Sterling said, standing up from the back of the room. He had arrived alone, carrying a single briefcase. He placed it on the floor with a quiet, solid thump. I request an opportunity to address the board regarding the structure in question, the collapsed brick wall on the border of lots 14 and 15. Brenda turned, her smile evaporating. She hadn't expected him to be so calm. She expected pleading. Mr. Sterling, you are here as the violating party, not as a voting member. You may speak only to acknowledge or dispute the fines, Brenda said, her voice dripping with control. I am disputing the premise of the entire action, George stated, walking slowly to the table. He laid 3 documents in front of Frank, the grounds chair. The collapsed wall is listed here as common property, and its damage is the primary cause for the large cleanup expense. I submit that the wall itself was never a legal structure. Brenda laughed, a dry, brittle sound. Are you serious? You destroy my wall and now you're claiming it wasn't legally there? I am claiming, George continued, ignoring her, that the wall was built by Brenda Sterling, Lot 15, in 2020. It was never approved by the ARC, as required by Cypress Grove Bylaw 3.4b. Furthermore, according to the official city survey maps I retrieved this morning, the wall's entire foundation encroached 4.2 inches onto Lot 14, my property. He produced the copies of the city surveys, clearly highlighting the property line and the intrusion. The documents were clean, official, and undeniable. The board members, especially Robert, the new member, began shuffling the papers nervously. This is a ridiculous, last-ditch effort to distract from your vandalism, Brenda hissed, her face tightening. That wall has been there for years. It's a decorative boundary, a boundary that illegally encroached on my land for 5 years, George countered, his voice steady. And if it was an illegal structure built without a permit and encroaching on my property, its destruction cannot be subject to a fine. only to removal of the rubble, which I am happy to perform, as it was on my land." He then pointed to a section of the HOA bylaws he had highlighted. Bylaw 7.1a states, "Any structural encroachment onto an adjoining lot is a violation of the highest order, requiring immediate deconstruction and a $10,000 fine paid to the HOA for legal and corrective costs." George's quiet words hit the room like a hammer. He had just turned Brenda's own weapon, the bylaws, against her, for a violation 10 times the amount of his initial fine. "Brenda," Ted, the treasurer, squeaked, his eyes wide.
Is this true?
"Did you build that without filing the 3.4b paperwork with the Architectural Review Committee?" Brenda's composure finally shattered. Her eyes darted around the room, meeting only suspicion and discomfort. "It was a technical oversight. The wall improved the curb appeal. The arc! I was the arc!" "It was a formality. I didn't encroach." "The city measurements are wrong." George leaned over the table, finally meeting her gaze. "Your claim that I owe the community $18,450 for destroying an illegal structure that encroached on my property, which you built without a permit, is now on record, Brenda. If the board votes to pursue the lien against me, I will immediately file suit against you personally for the $10,000 encroachment fine as mandated by 7.1a, and I will use the televised news coverage of your false hazmat report as evidence of malicious intent." He looked at the rest of the board. The question now is not who pays for the Tang cleanup. The question is, will the HOA stand by its own president who has violated the strictest rules, or will the HOA enforce its bylaws equally? The meeting descended into chaos. Robert and Frank argued that they had to enforce 7.1a or the entire community's rule book would be meaningless. Cynthia, loyal to Brenda, insisted George was a retaliatory vandal. Ted just wanted to disappear. Brenda, cornered, realized her only option was to destroy the source of the evidence. "This is character assassination," Brenda screamed, slamming her hand on the table. "I move to adjourn this meeting and reconvene when we have legal counsel to determine the validity of these fabricated claims." "Denied," George said calmly. "The bylaws require a vote when a violation is officially logged. I am officially logging a violation against Lot 15. Brenda Sterling for 7.1a. You have to vote on that first, before you vote on the lien against me." The truth was laid bare. The HOA, the instrument of Brenda's power, was now being used against her. Robert, seeing the clear legal liability, motioned for a vote on George's counterclaim. Frank seconded it. Ted, sweating profusely, abstained. The board voted 2-1, Cynthia against, in favor of formally initiating the violation process against Brenda Sterling for the $10,000 encroachment fine. Brenda stood up, knocking her chair backward with a violent scrape. Her face was contorted. The mask of the perfect HOA president finally cracked, revealing the raw, ugly nerve underneath. "You pathetic, cheap-suited little man," she spat, pointing a trembling finger at George. "You destroyed my garden, you made me a laughingstock on television, and now you think you can depose me with a 4-inch technicality? You have no idea the power I wield in this." The HOA clubhouse was not large enough for the crowd. The board, led by the shell-shocked treasurer Ted and the furious secretary Cynthia, moved the emergency community meeting outside to the sweltering community basketball court. Nearly 200 homeowners, the entire community, had shown up. Drawn by the viral news coverage and the catastrophic rumor that the HOA reserve fund was functionally bankrupt. Brenda Sterling, having been fined by her own board and temporarily stripped of her presidential authority pending a formal vote, stood at the podium first. She hadn't slept. Her eyes were red, but her tailored suit was perfect, and she carried a thick binder like a shield. "Residents of Cypress Grove," she began, her voice quivering with manufactured emotion. "We stand at a crossroads. A handful of irresponsible neighbors and an incompetent board have allowed a technicality, a mere 4.2-inch oversight on a 5-year-old wall, to overshadow the real danger, the outright vandalism and financial liability caused by the Sterlings." She slammed the hazmat invoice onto the podium. "The city is still demanding $18,450 for the cleanup of the toxic substance that ruined 2 properties. We can't fine the Sterlings for their damage unless we act now. If we allow George Sterling to paralyze us with his spiteful counterfines, we will lose our covenant. We will lose our neighborhood standards. This entire ordeal began with a giant, ugly orange box, and it ends with the destruction of our property values. Brenda's Lieutenant Cynthia stepped up. I move that we table the enforcement of the $10,000 fine against Brenda Sterling and instead immediately pass the $18,450 lien against the Sterlings of Lot 14. We must protect the community's finances first. A wave of murmuring swept through the crowd. Many residents, terrified of a special assessment to cover the lost reserve funds, nodded. $18,000 was tangible. $10,000 for an old wall was theoretical. George Sterling stepped forward as the shouts began to rise. He was calmer than he had been since the day the sun hit 104F. He didn't carry a binder or a fancy suit. He carried a small, empty plastic pitcher. I understand the fear of a special assessment, George said, his voice quiet but carrying surprising weight. But look at the problem, don't look at the noise. He walked to the edge of the crowd. Brenda is right. This started with a giant orange box. Our children, Maya and Leo, built it because it was 104F, and because our HOA bylaws prohibit any reasonable, common-sense temporary pool, even inflatable ones, unless they are sunk into the ground and permitted. My children didn't choose the rules. Brenda did. He paused, then held up the plastic pitcher. She reported our backyard pool, which was full of powdered Tang, as a toxic spill. She chose to escalate a neighborhood dispute into a city-wide hazmat incident. Why? Because the rules gave her the power to do it, and she believed she was untouchable. George then turned, facing the board directly. Now she asks you to table the fine against her, the fine for the wall that was illegally built on my property, in order to rush the fine against me. Why? Because she knows that if you enforce Bylaw 7.1a against her, it will cost the HOA approximately $25,000 to rebuild her illegal encroachment according to the very codes she wrote. He placed the empty pitcher on the podium. We are not fighting over 4.2 inches of land or a box of Tang. We are fighting over a broken system that allowed one person to weaponize the rules for her own power. If you vote to table her fine, you are saying that the president is above the rules. If you vote to pass the $18,450 lien against my family, you are telling the entire community that obedience to an absurd, broken rule is more important than financial sanity. A woman near the front, Mrs. Chen, who had a well-known grudge against Brenda, shouted, "We should vote to remove her first." The chant began to spread. "Vote her out! Vote her out!" Brenda, seeing her control dissolving, played her final card, a tearful, dramatic appeal. "I have dedicated 10 years of my life to this community," she cried, clutching her suit jacket. "I gave up my nights to fight weeds, to fight messy lawns, to keep your property values high. And I made one mistake, one technical mistake on a wall that was decorative. And you will sacrifice my 10 years of service for a family that brought the hazmat team here? Look at George! He is exploiting our crisis! He's trying to dissolve the covenants we worked so hard to build!" Just as Brenda reached her peak of theatrical anguish, a familiar, rough voice cut through the crowd. It was the anonymous contractor who had tipped off George. She didn't just make a technical oversight. The man, Mr. Davies, shouted, pushing his way through the crowd. "I was on the board in 2020. She used $15,000 of the HOA's landscaping maintenance budget to pay the guys she hired to build that wall. She never disclosed it. That wall was built with your dues, not her money, and she hid the cost under a false accounting entry." The sound that swept through the crowd was not a shout, but a collective, enraged gasp. Ted, the treasurer, eyes wide, immediately began frantically flipping through his finance packet. He stopped, pointed a trembling finger at the landscaping line item in question, and looked up at the community. He's right. There's a $15,000 unexplained expenditure in 2020 labeled grounds repair, but there's no invoice. The HOA budget was used to build her unapproved encroaching wall. The revelation was instantaneous and devastating. Brenda hadn't just broken the rules. She had committed outright financial malfeasance using the community's money to benefit herself. The meeting ended abruptly. The board, now functioning without Cynthia, who fled the scene, held an immediate emergency vote. First, they voted unanimously to dismiss the 18,450 fine and lien against the Sterlings of Lot 14, concluding that the damage was a direct, albeit unintentional, result of the HOA president's initial malicious over-reporting of a hazmat incident. Second, they voted to immediately and permanently remove Brenda Sterling from the board and initiate legal proceedings against her for financial misappropriation of $15,000 in HOA funds and the $10,000 encroachment fine. Third, they voted to use the $25,000 required to fix the legal fallout from the encroachment wall to, instead, establish a community legal defense fund. And crucially, to amend Bylaw 3.4b to allow temporary, above-ground, children's pools during summer heat advisories. The orange pool had become the symbol of their liberation from HOA absurdity. George and Clara walked home, the setting sun casting long shadows behind them. Their house was safe, the fines were gone, and their backyard was still a mess. But it was their mess. Leo and Maya ran out to meet them, hugging them fiercely. "We won." "Dad," Leo whispered. George looked over the demolished boundary. Brenda's house was dark and silent. She was inside, alone, facing bankruptcy, fraud charges, and the loss of her entire political identity. A few days later, a work crew showed up not with brick, but with a simple, tasteful line of 4.2-inch wide paving stones, marking the new, corrected boundary. George, still cleaning the stubborn orange residue from his patio, watched as the crew finished. As they packed up, the foreman handed George a small laminated plaque. "The new board wanted you to have this. Mr. Sterling. They voted on it last night." George read the inscription, the Tang line, a boundary wall against tyranny. He looked at the empty space where the pool once stood, then at the bright new boundary stones. The children's momentary, desperate pursuit of coolness had destroyed an illegal structure, bankrupted a tyrant, and changed the governance of an entire neighborhood. He walked inside, past Clara and the kids who were laughing, trying to scrub the last bit of orange dye off a concrete step with a wire brush. George placed the small plaque on the mantel, right next to a postcard from their last family. Vacation, a permanent monument to the summer. They accidentally started a revolution with a box of powdered orange. Drink. Powerful. Justice. Irony. Brenda is completely ruined.